Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The online retail giant Amazon paid less tax in the UK last year than the year before, even though its profits almost trebled. The company insists it pays what it should and is investing heavily in the UK. Well, our technology correspondent Rory Jones is here. Rory, one wonders how this is possible.
Well, this is about one part of Amazon's business in the UK, the whole warehouse and delivery operation that brings you parcels. And that's seen its profits rise quite sharply. In 2016, they were 24 million. The following year, 2017, they were up to 72 million, almost trebling. Meanwhile, the tax bill has actually gone down from 7.4 million in 2016 to just 4.6 million last year. And the reason for that is a scheme where Amazon gives all of its employees free shares. Those shares have done very well, reaping big profits for the employees. Amazon's allowed to set that off against tax. Now, the company says it pays all the tax that it's due, and it's investing a lot in the UK. Its rivals on the high street, they're not so worried about the tax that Amazon's paying. They're worried about the business rates they're paying, far more than something like Amazon, and they say it's not a level playing field.
OK, Rory, thank you. Rory Jones there.
George Turner is Director of Tax Watch UK. He joins us from central London. George, what questions raised for you?
Well, I think the biggest question is, what is the government going to do about this thing? In 2013, governments from around the world, the G8, released a declaration saying that they wanted to end aggressive tax avoidance by multinational companies. That came off the back of years of stories about the global digital giants, companies like Amazon avoiding taxes. And yet 5 years later, we're still getting these stories. So, I mean, what it's showing, if anything, is that the global effort for the last 5 years to try and tackle the tax avoidance being propagated by these big global digital giants is failing, or has not had any noticeable effect so far.
What specifically regarding the fight nationally rather than globally, HMRC saying that we make sure large businesses like everyone else pay all taxes due. They secured over £9 billion in additional tax revenue from the largest and most complex businesses, and they subject large businesses to an exceptional level of scrutiny, they say. Are they doing their job?
Well, the sad answer to that is we'll never know, because the transparency in this area is severely lacking. So, the story that's being covered today by all the news outlets is about the UK accounts of Amazon. And they only tell a partial picture of the activity of Amazon in this country. The UK accounts show about £2 billion in revenue in the UK. But we know from the US filed accounts of Amazon that they make about $11 billion in revenue in the UK. So a huge amount of Amazon's business is being conducted offshore. We can't see what's going on. We only really see the tip of the iceberg. And so as members of the public and as NGOs and other groups who want to follow this, who want to engage in the debate, we can not see very much about what's going on with Amazon. So one of the key things we need to do, and what Parliament needs to act, is greater transparency on multinational companies, so that we know exactly how much money they're making in this country, so that we can have a much better idea of the appropriate tax which is being paid and whether HMRC are really doing their job.
And for you, is it specifically with regards to what you're talking about there, is that to do with sales recorded elsewhere, even if they are in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, the way that Amazon is structured is that they have a kind of warehousing and distribution business here in the UK. But when you log on online and buy something, you're not actually buying it from the UK company, you're buying it from abroad. So that revenue is being booked somewhere else. It's pooled with loads of other countries in Europe, and therefore it's very difficult to break out of that. What are the costs actually incurred in the UK? What are the profits being made in the UK? But the profit levels being displayed in the UK business are very suspiciously low, which would suggest a large amount of profits being shifted offshore. I mean, just to give you one example, I was reading today a report on booksellers Now, if Amazon paid the kind of same percentage of their turnover in tax that booksellers do, their tax bill would be close to $100 million rather than the few million pounds we've seen today.
Interesting. Well, HMRC, as I said, would say that they are doing everything they can, exceptional levels of scrutiny, but more questions perhaps need to be asked. George, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
To one of our headlines, Amazon facing fresh criticism over the amount of tax that it's paying. Last year, the online retail giant's UK corporate tax bill fell by £2.8 million, despite a huge rise in pre-tax profits. The success of the company and those like it has had a huge impact, of course, on Britain's high streets. Asad Rehmanis, the director of the campaign group War on Want, which campaigns on global poverty issues, joins us now from our central London studio. Thanks for doing so today. How do you react to this news? Is it unfair on other shops on the high street?
Well, it's absolutely scandalous. We're in a situation where millions of people are trapped in poverty wages, struggling to make ends meet. We have parents worried about feeding their children over the summer. And we have our public services, such as our NHS and schools, struggling after years of austerity cuts. And here we have a company basically dodging its obligations. And it's a company owned by the richest person in the world, whose net worth went up 35 billion to 150 billion, whose profits went up in this country, but its tax bill went down. And that's because companies like Amazon rely on an army of advisors and lawyers in the City of London to advise them to how to dodge their obligations. And it's really time for the government to tackle these tax dodgers, to crack down on the city, to make big business pay for the profits it makes in this country. I think ordinary people would be shocked. If you make your profit here, if you do your trade here, then you should be paying your taxes here. And big business is escaping that obligation.
Well, let's make one thing clear. Amazon, as they said in their statement, pay the tax that they are required to pay in the UK and in every country where they operate. And indeed, HMRC, while they didn't identify an individual taxpayer, said that they make sure large businesses, just like everyone else, pay all taxes due under UK law. They don't settle for less, and Amazon have not done anything illegal. But when you're talking about changes to the tax system, what would you like to see happen in the short term? Because, you know, things like an activity tax and indeed taxes on a global scale is not likely to happen in the short term.
Well, actually, the government can act, and we've been calling on the government to act for many, many years, because this isn't the first scandal. Big business and many big corporations have been doing exactly the same thing. They're structuring their companies to trade here, to make their profit here, but claim that their profits are somewhere else with lower tax rates. Government can close loopholes. It can tell the HMRC, it can actually put more resources into it to go after big business. And it can actually also tackle the City of London, which enables and profits from this. So yes, whilst big business says it's technically not illegal, morally and politically, it's absolutely bankrupt for companies to make profit in this country and not to pay their fair share of taxes.
What do you think in terms of the not rivalry, but the competition between high street retailers and places like Amazon, and specifically when it comes to something like business rates? Is that something that you think could be changed quite quickly to reflect the fact that Amazon bases itself generally in large premises outside of city centres?
Well, I think the reality is we're facing a changing environment, particularly with these big internet companies. And these big internet companies, of course, are situating themselves in places such as out of cities. They're paying their workers very, very sort of low wages. There's huge scandals about working conditions in many of these environments. What actually needs to happen is a much clearer and a much stronger to action by the government. For too long, what we've done is basically enable big business to really set the rules for themselves. Instead of setting rules that all of us have to follow, that ordinary people, that local businesses have to follow, big business is basically escaping those responsibilities.
OK, Asad, thank you very much indeed for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now to a tale of two retailers. One, an online giant vying to be the biggest company in the world. Yes, it's Amazon. The other, House of Fraser, a high street stalwart which sells high-end goods in department stores up and down the country. It's now in serious trouble. Meanwhile, Amazon paid less UK tax last year despite profits almost trebling. So what's behind this contrast in fortunes? Ed Hauker takes a look.
One of the world's biggest companies. Its founder called the world's richest man. Amazon's reputation is to break barriers. Here's their latest patent, goggles for stock pickers dubbed the augmented reality user interface facilitating fulfillment. Not as catchy as Google Glass, but possibly more efficient. Also famously efficient, Amazon's approach to tax, using complex cross-border arrangements to perfectly legally minimise their bills. This week, we learned Amazon's principal UK subsidiary paid just $1.7 million in 2017. Contrast that with House of Fraser, founded in 1849. It stands on the brink this week, with high street sales down and a bailout deal on the rocks.
We're told, of course, that this is how the market is meant to operate. Creative destruction, with old industries giving way to new, innovative businesses. But there's a sense here, too, of Britain losing its grip, both on how it effectively taxes its biggest retailers and how it secures the future of the high streets that bind together our towns and cities.
Compare these two retail giants. While Amazon UK Services made a profit of £72 million, it paid that meagre corporation tax bill of £1.7 million. House of Fraser didn't pay tax because it made a loss, but it did have another consideration: onerous business rates paid on its prime high street stores. At its flagship Oxford Street store, one estimate puts the business rate bill at £4.62 million. That's nearly 3 times more than Amazon's last corporation tax bill.
Ultimately, Amazon as an entity will behave like every private company does. They're going to focus on optimizing their own profits. So I don't really look at Amazon and say, you need to, change the way that you do things. I think much more systemically, what can we be doing, in terms of changing the way that businesses like Amazon, Amazons of the future, behave when it comes to taxation?
How much of a threat are the likes of Amazon to the likes of House of Fraser?
Well, the threat is much more than just even House of Fraser. The high street success or failure impacts us all. It fundamentally powers the local and the national economy. It's the largest private sector employer in the UK. And there's hundreds of thousands of local businesses that are contributing fairly back into the economy without doing clever offshore tax systems to reduce their liabilities.
Give a little bit.
Amazon say that they reduce their UK tax bill by offering share awards to permanent employees, and they pay all taxes required in every country where they operate. Today, House of Fraser told us that they're in discussions with alternative investors to rescue the company. There are 17,000 jobs at stake.
Well, I'm joined now by the economist Faiza Shaheen from the Centre for Labour and Social Studies, and John Burnett, a financial consultant and Republican strategist in New York. John Burnett, do you understand why ordinary consumers, who are typically paying between £20 and £50 out of every £100 that they earn in tax, look at Amazon, that is paying £1.7 million tax on nearly £80 million profits based on £12 billion of turnover, and think something is not quite right?
Well, there is no perfect financial system that's based on capitalism on earth. Just like the UK, the US is comprised of both systems in terms of capitalism with a social safety net to provide for their employees. So there is an increased burden on corporations to make sure that they are good corporate citizens and they share the wealth. And that's what we're seeing here and now with regard to Amazon. I never thought I would live to see the day that those on the far left, that come from a far left perspective, really get upset and up in arms when the bourgeoisie actually shares the profits with the proletariat. And that's what we're seeing here. Amazon paid about $54 billion.
Yeah, I'm not talking about them sharing their profits with the workforce. I'm talking about them paying tax into broader society, into the government coffers.
Right. Well, there's two thoughts that come to play here. Should the majority of the taxes go to the government, or should they actually share the wealth with the employees? By virtue of them sharing the wealth with the employees, it reduced their tax burden.
Okay.
And they have 27,000. They have 27,000 employees.
Yeah.
I think what's at stake here,
I think we get the
is
point.
that the UK government has.
I'll come back to you in a second. It's just we're slightly limited in time, and I want to put that to Faiza Shaheen. They've done nothing wrong, have they, legally?
Well, that's what they would say. I mean, I think anyone looking at this story will feel outraged, and they'll feel outraged as a taxpayer because we've been told for years that we don't have enough money to give nurses pay rises, that we're all in it together. Obviously, when you hear news of big corporates, I mean, corporations with turnovers the size of 2 Kenyas, right? That they can afford to do better here. The richest man in the world owns this company. They feel frustrated, I think, outraged for small business. Small business is paying their taxes. On average, they pay their workers twice as much as those working in Amazon warehouses. So it's not a level playing field for small business. And then for workers themselves, workers at Amazon, GMB Union has been doing work with workers in their warehouses. There's outrageous stories, people having to pee in bottles because they're worried about wages being docked or not being able to fill their quota, about ambulances
That's a slightly
being
different
called
issue, isn't it?
out.
I mean, we're talking about tax here and whether
No,
any
I don't
rules
think
have
it
been
is a
broken.
separate issue because those things tend to go together, right? Paying lower taxes
but the workers are being given
exploiting
shares.
workers.
The workers are being given quite
this-
a lot of money, aren't they?
Well, this is the thing, right, about that point about shares. So Amazon have worked this system so that they go away with more profits. Now, they can say that their workers are getting more shares, but their workers are getting paid a really low amount. So they've spelled it out like this kind of either-or situation. Like, workers either get shares and have a really bad time at work, or they just have a really bad time at work. Surely, this big company making huge profits can do much better for its workers and for society.
John Burnett.
Well, let me say this. You've been watching the news, and President Trump has done a great job with lowering the taxation in the U.S., as well as making sure that we have a reasonably sound regulatory environment. Hence, he actually done away with a lot of regulations that was placing a stranglehold, not just only online businesses, but our brick and mortar structure corporations. So I would suggest that my friends on the other side of the pond really contemplate the right regulation that not only reduces the tax burden and other things on, or I should say business licensing and other things that actually put a financial burden on businesses, but that would allow them to fairly compete with online models, hire more people, put more disposable income into their staff workers, so that way you have a robust economy. In the U.S., we've seen an increase in wages, we've seen a decrease in the unemployment rate, and businesses are thriving. Everyone's a winner.
Okay.
And I think striking that balance is key, and
Faiza
not
Shaheen,
try to vilify.
You should be copying Donald Trump.
I mean, how outrageous is that in terms of this idea, again, of a trickle-down economics? We've been there. We've done that. We know what that did to levels of inequality. We know what that did to the average workers. What we need to be looking at now is a tax system that I agree there's something we need to do about tax and regulation, but I would say that we need to be working much harder closing those tax loopholes, making sure that our high street businesses and small businesses have a fairer rate of tax, and we need to.
But what are the loopholes? Because this is really confusing. Because a couple of years ago, people. Sorry, just 1 second, John Burnett. A couple of years ago, people were told that Amazon were going to book its taxes through Britain. So we all kind of thought, right, well, that's going to be fair. And yet you then end up with a £1.7 million tax bill. So what is the loophole that you think needs closing?
Yeah, so this is what they've done, how they've worked the system around shareholders. And other companies, it's important to remember that other companies that are doing this the right way. So John Lewis will pay 20 times more taxes than Amazon, and they pay their workers more, and they give their workers the right. So you can do this in a way, but you've got to have the will. Now, whereby companies are using the tax system in order to pay the minimum amount of tax possible, the minimum amount of workers as possible, then those need to be hit hard. One thing you wouldn't do is what we've seen over the last 8 years, which is to cut the number of people working at the HMRC to collect taxes.
Just briefly, John Burnett, I mean, isn't Trump playing a different game? Because he's hoping that Amazon's going to move its money onshore to the United States. That's why he's being so nice to them now.
Well, Amazon, Apple, a lot of these tech corporations are bringing money back onshore, as evident through the tax discount or tax break, and actually creating jobs at all levels, at the staff level as well as as high as the high tech level. So that's good for the economy. And to my counterpart here on this panel, when you actually aggressively place a stranglehold on businesses, they do two things. One, they actually find ways to not actually be domiciled within your geography, but while at the same time do business by selling goods, products, and services to your citizens. So we don't want to drive, or you shouldn't drive out business.
Okay.
You need to strike a balance. And with that said, I don't think this is a long-term trend here.
Well, on that note, thank you very much indeed, but we've got to leave it there. John Burnett, Faisal Shaheen, thank you both for coming in. Jackie.
Amazon today pulled off what in business is something of a coup. Last year, the company racked up £4.5 million in corporation tax in the UK, down £2.8 million on 2016. That's despite their pre-tax profits almost trebling to over £72 million. Now, that might seem paradoxical, but the company says it is all legal and above board. But once again, it raises questions of a tax system that can deliver such results to some of the biggest global corporations.
Picked, dispatched, delivered to your door. Speed of service has made Amazon a success and one of the UK's biggest retailers. But the company also runs a complex, low-profit business model, enabling it to pay little corporation tax and see off the competition.
They operate here, they've responsibilities here, both to their workforce, but also to the wider community, and they should be paying their whack, big whack in taxation.
Business taxes don't end with corporation tax. Firms with premises like shops, pubs and factories also pay business rates. They're a tax on property. And so traditional retailers with more high street stores tend to pay higher rates than their online competitors. This branch of Waterstones in Bedford has a rateable value of £765 per metre square, whereas the Amazon warehouse nearby in Dunstable is valued at just £65 per metre square. Nearly 20% of all retail sales are now made online, and that's growing. An online-only sales tax could be one way to end the advantage internet shops have over bricks and mortar.
What Amazon are doing is really the way that business is going to be in the future. It's the same with businesses like Google and Netflix. What they pay in corporation tax versus some UK established businesses is much smaller. So they're ahead of the curve, but this just shows how the taxation system we've got is pretty antiquated.
The government's long promised a review of business rates, but it hasn't happened yet. Lord Price, former boss of Waitrose and former trade minister, says there are no easy solutions.
75% of all of the taxes that are collected by the Treasury come directly or indirectly from business. And so what they can look to do is move taxes. They could increase VAT, but that's not going to be popular with consumers. And it's also going to affect all retailers in the same way. They could increase employees' contributions, so increase the rate of national insurance. But again, that's going to have impact on all employers.
High streets around the country are showing the scars of recent retail troubles. Calls are growing for the government to level the playing field. Joanna Partridge, News at 10.